Shalom and welcome to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. This is a recording of Rabbi Adam Kligfeld's weekly Rashi study class.
The last verse we read was verse 23 of chapter 7. Verse 24 of chapter 7. We'll read the verse. There was no Rashis on it. And then we will start with verse 25. So, verse 24, to get us going. Vayach Peru, Chol Mitzrayim, Svivot Hayaor, Mayim Lishtot. This is the last thing we discussed. Normally we would say that the word chafar means to dig, in which case the verse means that all of Egypt dug around the river for water to drink. Ki lo yachlu lishtot mimei hayaor, because they couldn't drink from the waters of the river. And I believe we looked at the commentary of the Netziv, who said that chafar can not only mean to dig, but also mean to search out, which means this works better here, because if it's to dig, they didn't dig the water, and in the way the verse is constructed, it looks like the word mayim is the direct object of chafar. They weren't digging water, they were digging for water. So therefore, he reads it as they were searching around the areas of the river for water to drink, because the water that was in the Nile itself was undrinkable. Okay, that's where we left off, and that brings us to verse 25. Were there any lingering questions or comments on verse 24 before we jump forward? No? Yes, Bill.
The thought about whether there should be any relationship whatsoever between what this first plague is and what the Jews were asking.
Speak up a little bit, Bill, because the only input is from this computer.
With what the Egyptians are doing now, they're searching in desperation for water, whereas what Pharaoh required the Hebrew slaves to do just before was to find straw where all they could find was stubble, fruitlessly trying to make the tally of bricks. So it's kind of
In terms of modern Egypt?
Well, in terms of what the Egyptians were now being asked to do, they were being asked to do it's impossible. Just like
I see.
To do the impossible. Got it. To make their tally.
Right. Nice. I'm not sure everyone on Zoom heard it. That the kind of the last major pronouncement of Pharaoh, aside from saying no, was basically saying, "You want to leave, therefore I'm going to reduce the basic ingredients that I'm going to give to you. You still have to produce the same quantity of bricks, which is naturally impossible." So the first thing the Egyptians are being asked to do is to do that which is impossible, which is to find water when there isn't. Interesting parallel. I had never thought about that. Thank you, Bill.
They were all asked to do the impossible physically.
Yeah. Thank you, Bill. Okay, verse 25, everyone. Norm, do you want to read verse 25?
Okay. Vayimolei Shivas Yamim.
Acharei, I think you skipped the line.
Oh, I'm sorry. Acharei Hakos Adonai Es Hayaor.
Okay.
And 7 days were completed. After that, after what happened was that Hashem had smitten the river.
Correct. After the smiting of the river by God, right? After it's a weird form. Hakot here really is a gerund, right? It's the smiting of the verb lehakot. So after the smiting of God of the river, right? Okay, so in some ways a pretty straightforward verse. We don't always get a sense of time in the Torah. Sometimes we have to guess how much time has transpired from the last scene to this scene. And now we're being told that a week has gone by. Before we look at the Rashi, be an interrogator. What about the verse, as we say, Omer Darsheni says, investigate me because it's deserving of investigation. Anything that this is for everyone. Anything that jumps out at you, Alan, and then Renee.
Why wait 7 days? What's the significance of this 7 days?
Okay, right. So built into your question is almost an answer, right? It almost must be that 7 has to mean something. Otherwise, why wait that long? And certainly why tell us that's that long? Okay, good. Renee?
Why does it say Hashem struck the river when it was actually Aaron that struck it?
Very interesting. Okay, so why is it not Hakot Aharon et Yayor? Right. So why does the Torah kind of continue to give credit, as it were, to God as the author of the plagues, even though it's actually the functioning of the plagues is happening via Aaron or Moshe's hands? Any other questions? Joel?
Just to piggyback on, and I think we talked about this. Why does use the word Yemaleh? It's almost like completing of a something.
Correct.
Happened to be 7 days. It was a completion of a 7 day period.
Correct. And so Baruch Shekivanta, because that's the direction the Rashi is going to go in. The word Malay suggests that had it been any less than that, it wouldn't have been full, right? So, and there's a different way of saying that 7 days transpired, right? This seems to say, if we're taking every word very seriously as we do in the Torah, that something like the full complement of 7 days was completed, right? As if to say that had only been 6 days, 6 days would have passed, but it would not have been malay. Malay means full, and anything that's not full is unfulfilled, right? Good. Any other questions on the verse before we look at Rashi? I saw a hand go up, and I'm like, whose hand is that? It was mine, because I was because it's far away. I'm like, who's that? Who's that guy talking and pointing over there? I do not. I have so many questions.
Yeah. I just want to read the translation. This is Lucas.
Okay.
It's wrong, right? It says, and 7 days were fulfilled. After that, Eternal had smitten the river.
After that, that seems to be a raw error, if I may.
Formation.
Oh,
after that, that's like
right. I see. Not after that, comma.
Right.
After that, God had done this. I see.
Yeah.
But since we're there, let's see if there are any interesting translations to look at. I'll share the screen 1 second. Okay, so which translation is this? So the current one is that Torah Yeshara, and the plague endured 7 full days, suggesting that he takes the verb vayimale and he actually turns it into an adjective describing the number of days. It endured 7 full days after the Eternal had struck the river, and he gives credit to that translation to Rashi's grandson, the Rashbam. JPS, JPS. What's going on here?
That's chapter 8.
Yeah, it jumped for me. So bizarre.
You went too far back. You're like 5 and 6.
Yeah, sorry. When 7 days had passed after God had struck the Nile, so JPS doesn't even do it as a full sentence, doesn't say that they had passed, and it doesn't deal with Malay, just when 7 days had passed after God had struck the Nile, comma, suggesting that this is halfway through a sentence. Everett Fox. 7 days were fulfilled. There you go, Joe, right? So he's on your wavelength. He says 7 days were fulfilled. He says the verb malay means something. It doesn't just mean transpire after God had struck the Nile. And Corin, after 7 days were completed, after the Lord had smitten the river. What do you got?
I don't have that. Sorry, I don't have Alter or Kevin here.
Okay.
I have not, but I have a comment and a question.
Okay.
About the translation. So did you read the JPS one first?
Did I read it first?
I think you.
The first one was Torah Yeshara by.
No, but what's the translation of up there?
Currently?
Yeah.
Currently, this is the Koran. No, Mitsuda. 7 full days passed after Adonai had struck the river.
So read the JPS.
The JPS. Okay.
Because it is significantly different.
When 7 days had passed after the Lord had struck the Nile.
Continue.
Right. It doesn't read it as a full sentence.
So, and there's a big difference because the others are basically saying everything you need to know in this verse is contained in the verse. So the implication is that God struck the Nile and then the Nile remained plagued for 7 days. At least that's my reading of all the other translations.
Okay.
Right. But the JPS doesn't say that. The JPS says that when 7 days had passed, after God had struck the Nile, something else happened. which we're going to read in the next verse. So there's no implication there. The plague lasted, at least in that translation, the plague lasted for 7 days.
I'm not following. Say it again. I'm sure you're saying something important. I just can't follow it yet.
In all the other translations, there's an implication that this plague lasted for 7 days,
Which is certainly Rashi's position.
which is,
Can I help you out here?
go ahead.
Because because there's a period, it suggests that the 7 days that we're hearing about is the length of the plague as opposed to just the length until the next thing happens.
Until then, right, exactly.
I see.
It's not clear
Right.
that the plague is over.
Yeah,
in
yeah.
this translation.
Yeah,
And that we'll see, as Norman said, when we read Rashi, that's what's going to be important.
right.
So this could be one of those, according to JPS, this is one of those verses which we have every once in a while, which doesn't convey a complete thought and is simply an introduction to the next verse.
Right.
Or it could be a verse which actually conveys all the information we need to understand that verse.
Right. And what's interesting about JPS choosing to read it that way is that it ignores the structure of the paragraph, because at the end of this verse, you have a ptucha, you have the editor of the Torah pressing return, or at least return on the keyboard, as it were. So the Torah, as it's laid out in the scroll, does not think of this as half of a verse. It thinks of it as the end of a paragraph. Right.
Right.
Yeah. Right. Some of you actually will see that in your chumashim. There should be a big pay there saying it's a ptucha.
Dr. Steen says the 7-day period was filled after Hashem struck the river.
Right. So everyone agrees that there's 7 days have transpired since the river was struck. The question is, are what we pulling from that verse that the plague itself lasted 7 days, or just the next thing that's going to happen in the story happened 7 days after the river was struck? And is that significantly different? Rick.
A question. So looking to the next sentence, because it's right there, doesn't mention the blood and the water anymore. So does that mean the blood never went back to water, or it did after the 7 days? I'm just asking. I just assumed that the plague stopped, it came and went, and then the next one came and went. But if it's still going on, that's totally different. So I never knew about that. I never realized the plague could have still kept going. It never says the blood returned to water. So
as we'll find out as we go slowly through these plagues, there are parallels and also non-parallels in terms of the way the Torah lays out the beginnings and the endings of the plagues, and not every plague ends. I don't know that we're supposed to then think that it continued, but we're not told that every plague ends, right? This plague, as those who read ahead see, we're already into the next plague very soon. And what the Egyptian courtiers did was not stop the plague. We talked about that last time. What they did was show that they also were able to turn their own water into blood, right? So sometimes
they get any water to turn into blood.
From the Hebrews.
Yeah.
If all the water is into blood, what are they converting into blood?
Yeah.
But maybe the water of the Hebrews did not turn into blood, because otherwise Bnei Israel would have suffered as well. And that
So do we think that the sorcerers and witches or warlocks were able to go to Goshen and show that they could turn that water into blood?
Maybe.
Right. So
within
The court at that time, the capital at that time was English.
So it's an interesting question about that, right? That we didn't actually raise that question. We talked about this topic. We talked about the fact that it seemed odd that to show their power, they were doing the very thing to their own water supply as had been done to the water supply. But you're asking a more subtle question, which is that whatever they're doing, they needed non-blood water to do it, apparently. So and where would they have found it? It's interesting. I hadn't thought about that.
They also need water to live. And if all the water has been turned to blood, how were the Egyptians able to survive?
Well, they weren't. That's the whole point.
Oh, fear.
When I'm out of water, I also turn to beer. Sometimes even when I'm not out of water. Okay.
Turned into blood.
Feisty crowd today. Let's look at Rashi and Vayimale. I have your blessing to go forward. Rick, is your hand up again or still?
Again, please, Onkelos, could you translate that, please? The Batar Dimcha.
Yeah. The Ashlem Shivat Yomin. So Ashlem is a version of Malay. Completed is Batar is Achar. That's just de that mecha. That's the Aramaic verb to smite or to hit. That God had smouted the river. Yes, smote. I know. Okay, Norm, please read the Rashi on Vayimale.
Vayimale Minya. Shivas Yamim Shalo Shav Hayaor Lekad Muso.
Okay, so pause right there. And even this will be another Rashi where his answer will be easier to discern than his question, because he's asking a question similar to what we've been asking about, but he's asking it on a technical grammatical level, and I want to see if we can figure that out. So when his first thing he says is Vayimale, he says the word minyan. What does the word minyan mean, aside from what Michael wants to get us at PM?
A quorum.
Right, a quorum, a fixed amount, a numbering, right? Limnot is to number. A minyan is that which has been numbered. Accounting, right? So I'm trying to ask this question without giving away. What is he saying when the first thing Rashi says is Vayimale minyan? What's he saying? Why is he saying it? Or why is he adding the word in minyan in before Shivat Yamin, which is what the Torah says? Right? Basically, the Torah has three words: Vayimale, Shivat Yamim. 7 days were filled. Rashi basically inserts a word to help us understand the sentence from his perspective. Vayimale minyan Shivat Yamim.
Isn't Vayimale singular?
Yes, and
Shivat Yamim is plural.
Very good. Right? So he's getting to the problem in the verse through raw grammar. Vayimale is masculine, singular, vav hayipuch, past tense, right? It looks like it says, and it will fill. It means, and it filled and it was completed, but it requires a singular verb. Shivat yamim is not a singular idea. It's a plural idea. Anything more than one is plural. So Rashi says the subject of the verb vayimale doesn't appear in the verse, or it's a conceptual subject, and I'm going to include it. What's the subject? Minyan. Minyan shivat vayimale, minyan shivat yamim. A collection of 7 days, a complete quorum of 7 days was completed. Okay? So he's solving first the grammatical problem, and now he's going to tell you what do you think that actually means, okay? Shalosh shav hayor lekad muto. Meaning what?
Shahoisa hamaka.
Wait, I translate the previous 4 words.
Oh, the previous 4 words. The shalosh of during which the river did not return to its original condition.
Right. So this is Rashi's answering into the direction you were discussing, Larry, saying the full complement of 7 days was filled, during which the river stayed bloody. Okay. Now let's see where he goes with it. Shahita.
Okay.
Shahita hamaka.
It was Musagin.
I think you're in the.
I'm in the wrong one. Shahoisa hamaka mishmeres
Meshet.
Revia chodesh. Because it's a quarter of a month. Vini halakim hoya.
That's a gimel, meaning 3. Bishloshach. That gimel that you're seeing with a apostrophe is just a way of saying 3.
Oh, okay. Halakim hoya meid.
Okay, so for 7 days, the Nile stayed bloody, from which he's learning kind of a general principle about how all these plagues are going to go. Shahita hamaka mishameshet revi'ah chodesh, for the plague, and I think by the word the plague here, he's meaning the way this is going to go.
Each plague.
Right. It's a way of saying each plague. Each plague. Mishameshet, it's a weird verb. It means to serve. It means it's going to be present for Revi'ah Chodesh, right? It's not precise math, right? It's more precise in a lunar month than it is in a in a solar month, right? Because a lunar month is closer to 28 days in a solar month. But it's going to be around for a fourth of the month, Ushlosha Chalakim, and the three other fourths, that's his way of doing 3/4, Haya, Me'id, Umatre Bahem. What does that mean? Me'id Umatre.
He warned them and cautioned them.
Right. More Leha'id means to kind of bring testimony, right? Tell he's going to tell Pharaoh, exactly what's going to happen, umatre, and warn them, right? So what Rashi is learning from the what's the word? The ghost word minyan that is not in the verse, that we're learning something generalized about the way these plagues are going to go. Each plague represents a month, which means it gives us a sense of the timing. The plagues, Rashi is going to argue, he's going to refer to it later to, last almost a year, right? Didn't happen one after the other. And more time was spent trying to cajole Pharaoh than smiting the Egyptians. I wonder, and I can't prove this, if underneath what Rashi is saying here is almost a way of saying, you, reader, are about to be exposed to God's fury. You, reader, are about to maybe wonder how to relate, to a benevolent God who is being so malevolent, maybe earned, to the Egyptian people. And I, Rashi, am learning from the absence of this word minyan, but it's supposed to be there, that most of this time was actually spent trying to convince Pharaoh to give up and to relent, and warning him and warning him and warning him and warning him. It's been 3 weeks. I'm warning you. All right, it's time for the next plague. That's the cycle, right? Rashi may not be saying that. That may be my 21st century mind wanting him to say that. But it's interesting to imagine his saying that of the month of time in between the plagues, quote unquote, only a week of it are the frogs everywhere about to see. 3 weeks of it are God, through Moshe and Aaron, saying to Pharaoh, please, you can end this. Right? It can all end right now. I saw your hand about to go up. Yeah. Alan.
Mm-hmm. How does your theory reconcile with God's hardening Pharaoh's heart?
Yeah.
All the way through. It seems to be that the plan that was done even in Genesis, you're going to be staying here, that this is going to happen.
Yeah.
It doesn't say God hardens his heart.
No, later on.
No, I know it does later on, but in this one.
Yeah, no, the first 5 are the passive, and the other 5 are the active.
I don't have a great answer to that, Alan, right? I will study this material and still try to worship HaKadosh Baruch Hu for the rest of my life, and not fully come to terms with how we're supposed to understand what the Torah is saying about God's role in human decision-making, and then the quote-unquote punishments we get for the poor decisions, right? I am moved by the notion that we see throughout the story that one way of understanding God hardening the heart is understanding that the human condition is such that when you continue to do something over and over again, it becomes more part of you than you would like to think, and it's harder to change. And that is when God hardens your heart, right? Like if you're stubborn 5 times in a row, the 6th time, you're no longer in control because you're so used to being stubborn. And that's maybe what the Torah is saying. At that point, the way that God created humanity comes into being, right? And we all know that it's much harder to change behavior after we've habituated to it, right? So it's helpful for that read to see that in the beginning, as you were mentioning before, it's Pharaoh hardening his heart. And he had a chance on the 2nd time to not harden his heart, but he didn't. He had a chance on the 3rd time to not harden his heart, but he didn't. By the time he got to the 6th time, that's who Pharaoh was. He was a hard heart, right? And we saw that actually. I think Rashi was talking about that on Vayechazak Lev Paro as a way of saying not that his heart became hardened, but it's describing his heart. That's the kind of person that he was. It's hard to change that. But I don't have a great answer to it. Larry, and then Norm.
Just to comment on your last response to Alan, first, which we've been talking about God's hardening Pharaoh's heart for a long, long time in this class.
Yeah.
The first time I remember was long before Shemot, when you inspired Joel and I to do that session.
Yes.
About hardening one's heart. And it's like, oh.
Yeah.
So I guess we're gonna continue to talk about it and not resolve it for a long time.
Right.
I have an alternative view of how you read the verses and why the Petucha works, the Petucha, the pay at the end of the verse.
Petucha.
Petucha works, and that's that rather than be connected to the following verse, it's actually connected to the previous verse. And instead of a when, which JPS has, I would have put an until. So I would have put the vav to be an until. So they could not drink the water of the Nile until 7 days had passed after God struck the Nile.
End of paragraph.
And now I'm happy.
Very lovely.
But I
Very
don't see
lovely.
anybody who does that.
No, because that's why when you publish your translation, it's going to be novel. Is that a Calgary Flames hat?
Yeah, this was a gift that I got from
I'm sorry, everyone. I just noticed.
Oppenheimer. No, it had it with the show. It doesn't hardly ever comes anymore. Barry Oppenheimer.
Yeah.
When he gave out gifts, I can't remember the occasion. It's a library minion for something, and my gift was a Calgary hat.
Right. It's a nice hat. Nice looking hat. Okay. Anyone else on this verse? Oh, yes, Norm. Sorry.
I think Larry's.
By the way, for all of you who are watching, that's the hat. Sorry, podcasters. I can't show you the hat on the podcast. Yes.
It's a really good one. The idea of the 7 day period apparently comes from the Midrash. And this translation also suggests looking at Rashi on Bereshis 38:27.
All right.
Which I can't do in this volume.
Hold on. Let me pull it up. Bereshit 30. I'm trying to think, imagine where that is. 38:27. I know what parsha it's in, but what could it be? 38:27.
38:27.
All right.
Having to do with the period being completed or fulfilled.
Okay, so this is 38:27. This is the end of the story of Judah and Tamar, right? Where Tamar pretends to be a harlot to catch Judah in his hypocrisy, and she's gives birth to twins. So the verse is Vayehi be'et lita, and it was when it came time at the time of is also a gerund, her giving birth. Behold, there were twins in her belly. Let's see what Rashi says. Okay. Let's open it so we can see it here. All right. Uva Rivka hu omer, when it comes to Rivka's giving birth, it says Vayimlu'u yameha laledet. Oh, yes. That when it comes to Rivka, the verb is malay, meaning that the proper amount of time had been filled. Lahalan limlaim bechan lachasirim. That suggests that Rivka's pregnancy was full term, and this is Rashi saying that the Torah, when the Torah says that it was the time that for her to give birth, or when she gave birth, as opposed to saying that her pregnancy was completed, it suggests that they were preemies, right? Which, by the way, happens oftentimes when you have twins. That there, when Rivka was giving birth to her twins, it was full term, cham lachasarim. Here, it was short of the full term. Yeah. So it's the commentary is saying it's another place where Rashi is saying that the presence of the verb malay suggests a certain appropriate amount of time being completed, and the absence of it suggesting that it was not completed. Yeah, great. Okay, let's go to verse 26.
Can I say something?
Please,
before we
Tova.
Go on to the next. I'm going back.
Just project a little bit more if you don't mind.
I'm sorry?
Just project the more for the.
Project a little more.
Yeah.
Okay. I wanted to bring some information on verse 22. I know I wasn't here that day, but Rick had asked me to do some research on whether the magicians, the Egyptian magicians, would have whispered, because that was one of the translations. So I actually did a good deal of reading in my library, and it's really unlikely. That interpretation is really unlikely, because the practice of Heka, or magic as it's translated here, was very dependent on one, having a clear intention of what you wanted to accomplish, and then what they call enunciation, which is speech, and speech that can be heard. Now, that doesn't mean they're doing it in front of a crowd. It is secret, so it would be in the inner sanctuary of the temple, perhaps. but it would be enunciated clearly so that it could be heard.
And not a lachash, not a whisper.
Not a whisper,
Interesting.
absolutely not a whisper. That I looked extensively, and there's a whole section that I brought this actually because I thought Rick was going to be here. I forgot he's usually on Zoom for him, called creative speech, because they had a concept very similar to the description in Rashi, that the way things came into being was an intent was formed and a word was spoken. Speech was the active, effective part that brings it about.
Baruch Shamar Ya'olam, right? Blessed be God who spoke and the word comes to being.
Yes,
Really?
yeah.
Wow.
So they're very similar there. And that the concept of Heka, which I think really tragically gets translated as magic for us because we think magic, trickery, falsehood. There was nothing false about it in the Egyptian mind. It was the way the world functioned. The world came into creation through Heka. And in a smaller way, priests were able to carry out small changes. Basically, Heka was a change accomplished through unseen means.
Unseen means.
Unseen means, right. Voice can't be seen, it can be heard, but it's, and the other thing that I ran across, because I was looking.
Unless you're at Sinai and it says Bayar Takulot, that people saw the sounds. Or if you live in Southern Connecticut, in which case you could see the Long Island sound.
Right.
I'm sorry, it's a Southern Connecticut thingy. Okay, go ahead.
The other thing that I ran across was one of the likely translations of the kind of priests, because they would have been priests, not magicians, priests who would have done this work of emulating what Moses and Aaron were doing. The title would likely have been something like Partem, which made me think of Partumim.
Oh, wow.
I know it's derived from a root that's related to engraving in Hebrew, but it just really hit me that that's in fact what the Egyptian would have been for those kind of priests. And the final thing that I ran across, and it kind of relates to what we touched on, I haven't looked at it as much, is that I found a list of the three terms used for what's sometimes translated as hardening of the heart. Kaved is one of them, and that one is only used when it's Pharaoh that is doing it. And that really struck me because kaved can mean both heaviness, but also honor, weight of honor or praise. And in the earlier part, and it's like what you were saying, that he is doing something to himself that eventually becomes unbreakable. But it's like what he's doing is by ignoring the challenge and accepting the power that he feels that he has, that's sort of the honorific praise. But at the same time, he's, as Rick has pointed out, increasing the heaviness of his heart, which in the Egyptian context means he's weighing down that scale that's going to lead to the destruction of his soul, literally. And that seemed very striking. I want to look at it more, but that is what he's doing to himself in the beginning.
Thank you, Tova, for all of those.
So that was for Rick.
Your description of Heka?
Yes, heart. So it's heart, and the tep, but it would be HART, and then the P is a little followed.
But the word that you were saying is not easily translated into magic was Heka?
Oh, Heka. Oh,
Heka,
sorry, magic.
yeah.
Heka is a very fundamental concept. Heka.
It's
for the word Hecate. The goddess Hecate. That comes from Heka.
It's another great example of the impossibility of translation over time, right? A single noun represents, there are thousands of layers of what a civilization understood to just be true about the world. And so to try to convert that into the closest possible modern analog in the language called English, it's just, there's no way to do it. I speak about this all the time, but I did it in my meditation last week on Tuman Tahara, right? There's just no way of really rendering Tameh and Tahor into modern English in a way that really gives you a scintilla of the understanding of what it might have meant to an ancient Israelite, right? And pure and impure are the worst translations, but it takes a class to explain what that one word means. And so magic may be the best, use of Arabic letters in the English language to render that word, but you need a master's degree to understand, right, what really that concept meant. So thank you for that. Okay, great. Let's go to verse 26, correct? Whom have we not heard from? Rebecca, do you want to read verse 26 for us?
Okay. Vayomer Adonai el Moshe, bo el Paro, va'amarta elav, ko amar Adonai, shalach et ami, vaya'avduni.
And before she translates, because some of you already kind of think about the words, in Rashi's mind, he's going to suggest that what we're about to read took 3 weeks of time, right? Keep going.
And God said to Moses, come unto Pharaoh and say to him, thus says God, let my people go, send out my people that they may serve me.
Right. And a version of this sentence is going to happen many, many times in these verses, right? Where the intermezzo in between the end or the waning of the previous plague and the beginning of the next plague is, I'm giving you a chance, just send them out. And and the exact language of what they should do when they come out changes. Here, it's a one word, vaya abduni, that they may serve me, that they may worship me. Okay. Rashi is quiet on the verse. Maybe he's quiet because it's a kind of a repeating verse, and he probably said something about this, the first time this is mentioned. But the fact that Rashi is quiet in the verse does not suggest that we have to be quiet in the verse. Any thoughts on the verse or questions? Yes, Diane?
So there's kind of an implication here that the plague is continuing, that they would be in a much stronger position to go to Pharaoh if this plague is continuing and say, hey, you want this to end, all you got to do is let us go out and serve you.
Right. As opposed to having it already been completed, in which case their incentive is lowered.
Right.
Interesting. Yeah. Okay. Anyone else on the verse? Yes, Joel.
And this is the second time he's asking, right? One before the plague?
Well, I think
caused the whole.
Yeah, I think that if you look back at verse 16, right? This is within what God says to Moshe for what he's going to do. The Marta Elav, and you, Moses, should say to him, Pharaoh, and this is God speaking, but God telling Moses to speak, Adonai Elohei Avrim Shalachani Elecha, Adonai, the God of the Hebrews, has sent me to you, Lemor, to say, quote, this is that verse that had like quotation inside of quotation inside of quotation, Shalach et ami v'avduni, almost exact same language, except that it's, actually the exact same words. Send my people that they may worship me, except that that verse adds the word Bamidbar, and that you had not answered up until then. I don't remember.
5.
It came up earlier. Bamidbar. Yeah, that they will send my people, and this is before the doubling of the bricks. Is that right?
Right.
Yeah. But go ahead, Joel. What were you going to say?
So it sounds like as time goes on, their demands get stronger. I mean, the first time is just let them go out for a time period just so they can. What's the verb?
Lachgogli, to do a festival to me.
Yeah. And now it's to worship me, and then to worship me in the desert, and then it's to worship me, and so it's sort of like opening the door for that. This is going to end up being a permanent thing.
I'm trying to just looking ahead quickly what the next one is. Many more verses to get through the frogs. Well, when we get to the next one, we'll have that comparison. Elon.
Yeah, just a grammatical question, which is, it says Marta Elav. Isn't that, and he said to him, and why would that be translated and say to him?
Right. So it's that vav ha'ipuch that in biblical Hebrew, it takes a verb that looks future and renders it past, and takes a verb that looks past and renders it future. So you take the vav out. Amarta is you said. Depending on how it's used in the Torah, v'amarta is and you will say. Even though you will say without the vav hayipuch, is tomar. So it flips it around. So it does look like a past tense verb. It's used as a future tense verb because of that vav hayipuch, right? And a vav at the beginning of a verb like that sometimes is a vav hayipuch, which literally means the vav which flips around. Hofech means to turn something over from past to future, future to present. But sometimes it doesn't do that, and you have to figure it out by context. But you're right that it doesn't look like that's what it says. Norm.
After the frogs, it's different. We don't have this sort of demand because Pharaoh seems to be taking them seriously and asks Moshe and Aaron to get this plague to end. And Moses, and he will then let them go.
I see. Without
period of time. And he makes this offer, and Moses and Aaron comply with the demand, and then Pharaoh reneges.
Got it. Which goes back to Diane's comment as to whether or not we should be thinking that in this moment, is there or is there not still blood in the Nile, right? Good. All right. So that was a worthy expansion of that verse. Rebecca, you didn't get a Rashi, so do the next verse, please. Which is still in the quotation marks, right? So just to keep track, God is saying to Moses, and he's saying to Moses, when you go to Pharaoh, this is what should you say to him. And what you should say to him is, this is what God had said. So it's 3 levels of quotation marks. And I think we should understand the beginning of verse 27 to be outside, within that 3rd level of quotation marks, because it's God telling Moses to say to Pharaoh what God had said. Go ahead.
Ve'im ma'en ata l'shaleach, hine anochi nogef et kol gevulcha b'tzafar de'im.
Good.
And if you refuse to send them out, behold, I will smite all your borders with frogs.
Good. And going back to Elon's question, there's interesting use of tense in this verse. And remember that a cousin to what I was saying to Tova before, tense just means something different in modern English as it did in biblical Hebrew. It's not quite 3 tenses the way we think of it now, but in the middle of this verb of this verse, you've got a present tense verb, right? So if you refuse, and we'll discuss in a moment how to understand even the word ma'ain, but if you refuse to send, behold, ani nogef, I am smiting, I am plaguing. It doesn't say anochi egof, that I will, right? So how to understand why in the middle of this verse that God is telling Moses to say to Pharaoh what God said, it's switching to a present tense a verb, and maybe just present tense meant something different to them at your entire border with Tzfardeim. Look for a moment at the Aramaic. Sometimes in the Onkelos, sometimes there are 1-to-1 switches of letters from Aramaic to Hebrew, like an ayin is a Hebrew tzadi is sometimes rendered in a word an Aramaic ayin. Here, and I do not know nearly enough about the etymological relationship between Hebrew and Aramaic to know why, but I just pointed out the word for frog is urda'ania, where the ayin of the Aramaic has taken the place not only of a tzadi in Hebrew, which happens all the time, right? Eretz is Hebrew, ara, where the tzadi becomes an ayin in Aramaic, or maybe the other way around. Here, the ayin in Aramaic has taken place of the tzadi and the pei. Right? Which is interesting to point out, right? It's clearly the same word, but the reish dalid ayin of the end of the noun frog is the same, and the place of the tzfa in Hebrew is an oh in Aramaic. I don't know why, and I haven't seen that before that I'm aware of. Okay. Questions, comments on the verse before we start looking at the Rashi? Floor is open. Yes, Diane.
So I just want to point out that even in English, our use of present tense to mean future is very common. We don't have a really strong future tense like other languages do. So we say, this afternoon, I'm going to the store.
Nice.
or I'm eating at a restaurant, whatever. We often use present tense for future.
Yeah. I don't know what's the chicken and what's the egg here. Does the language form follow the thinking, or does the thinking follow language form, or both? I wonder if it's a shorthand way of saying, so in that moment in the future, imagine me doing this, right? So here we are in that future moment tomorrow that I've explained to you. And what am I doing tomorrow? I am going shopping, right? It's like I've placed us in a future moment, and then I describe what I'm going to be doing there as if it's happening in real time. So if you read that into here, right? So if you refuse to do that, behold, you will be witnessing me smiting all of your borders with frogs, right? I don't know if that's true, but I wonder if that's what's behind some languages describing future events in the present tense, right? As if we've been placed into the future, and therefore once we're in the future, it's happening in real time.
So, yeah, I mean, that's a really broad question just about language in general, which is why it's so hard to do translation, but also why you don't really understand civilization or culture if you don't understand the language.
Yeah. By the way, I think we also do it in past tense, right? Colloquially, I can say all the time, what is Rashi doing in this verse, right? Clearly he did it, but it's like we jump back into Rashi's hut in Troy, and we're saying he's reading this verse, and what Rashi reads in this verse is, so we throw the present tense verb into the future and the past. And I wonder, I never thought about this before. I wonder if it's because we're placing ourselves in that moment and then experiencing that moment that happened or that will happen as if it's happening. Yeah. I see hands on the Zoom for 1 second. So I see Rick, and then Barbara, and then Alan.
Hi.
Hi.
Question: why are the frogs coming from the borders, the gevulcha? Why not? Why aren't they coming from the river, the water?
Okay, so for someone who reads ahead,
I didn't.
No, but this time you should have. The next verse gives us a lot of details to where they're going to come from. I'm not sure we're supposed to understand that this is where they're coming from, but basically saying the nigifa that I'm going to do, the plaguing that I'm going to do is going to reach all of your borders. Not that they're coming from the border countries, but I'm going to make sure that this negev, this plague, extends to your borders. That's my read of that verse. But we'll get the details about how the frogs are going to come in the next verse, which we'll read about in a month. Barbara.
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out why 26 and 27 are two separate sentences. Because if you take 27 just by itself, and it says, if thou refuse, which sounds like Hashem is talking to Moses, and not Hashem talking to Pharaoh to let them go. Behold, I will smite all the borders. But in this case, really, it starts with, thus saith, you almost could have ended the 26 with, before, thus saith the Lord, let my people go, that they may serve me. And if thou refuse to let them go, because we're going back, that he's talking to telling Moses to talk to Pharaoh. Is there any?
Well, it's a long sentence, right? And the Torah, it's a long speech, a long-ish speech.
Right. And why is it divided? I don't understand. I mean, you probably can't explain it, but to me, it's peculiar that it was divided like that.
Right. So
the rest of the chapter is one quote.
Right. So in what you just said, Barbara, was one idea. But if we were punctuating this, what you had just said right now, we'd have put several periods in. Right, because sometimes it takes more than one sentence to articulate an idea. So I think you're right that 27 is an extension of 26. We're still within the quotation marks, and as Norm said, we're going to stay there for quite a while. But unless everything is a run-on sentence like I'm doing right now, there are periods that come in to say this is the end of a grammatical sentence, a collection of words, even though it's not the end of the thought. Right. Alan?
Yeah. Good.
Pass? Okay. Norm?
Barbara mentioned it. It's translated, if thou refuse to let them go, but it can also be translated if you are a refuser. A refuser is somebody who just refuses all the time.
Right. So hold that thought and let's read that in the Rashi, because that's the direction the Rashi is going to go in. So Rebecca, we'll probably end with this. V'im ata.
V'im ata, and if you refuse. V'im sarban ata, ma'ain kamo.
So the first, when Rashi takes, like he did in the previous verse, he takes words from the verse and adds a word or replaces a word, but otherwise keeps it the same. It's his way of saying what I really think these words mean are, or to make it more easy to understand, is replace the word ma'ain with sarvan. So ma'ain looks like a verb form. If you refuse as a verb. What does sarvan mean? Lissarev means to refuse, but a sarvan, when you have a nun ending at the end of a verb, you've turned the verb into describing the person doing it, right? Like, I'm trying to think of an example that you would know.
Batlan.
A batlan, very good, right? So levatel means to nullify something. A batlan is someone who sits around and does nothing, right? And there are other examples as well. So the first thing Rashi says is, it looks like a verb in the verse, ma'ain, but I read it as the noun describing the person who acts that way. If you are a refuser, as Norm said, now keep going.
Ma'ain kamo mama'ain masarev. And if you're a refuser, if you're stubborn, mine says, ma'ain is like mama'ain, refusing.
Right. So he's saying a lot. He's saying a lot very, very tersely. He says the form ma'ain should really be understood as mima'ain, the one who, because and the reason he says that, and he's not saying it, but you have to understand it, is that if you understand, if it was just ma'ain, it would mean stopping someone else from doing something, as opposed to you're not doing something. So read ma'ain as mima'ain, the one who refuses, like misarev, the one who refuses. And another way of saying misarev, the one who refuses, is to put into a noun, a refuser. Ella
kinui ha'adam al shem hamifal kamo Eov shalev shoket sar v'tzaef.
Good. So these are the very verses I was not able to pull up beforehand because my computer wasn't working. So let me pull them up right now. So first one was Eov. Can you just give me the citation? Eov what? Do you have it?
1612.
1612. Okay. So what he's going to say here is pikayun, right? I'm not sure it really changes so much the meaning of the verse, but if one of you wants to make the argument that it does, I'm all open to it. But he's saying, so even though it should have been mimma'ain or misarev, ela kina. Kina means, a kinui is a nickname in modern Hebrew, but kina basically means to, I don't know how to say it in one word in English, like to render the word this way rather than that way, right? So the Torah, he rendered it as describing the man, the person, al shem hamifal, based on the thing that person does, on this, based on the action, as opposed to just using a verb describing what he's doing. Kamo shalev. Okay, so let's look at this. Is it on the screen? 1612. Shalev hayiti vayafarpreni v'achaz b'orpi. I had been, shalev is often understood as being tranquil, right? But it's not. It's describing the person as a tranquiler, as opposed to mishalev, that I acted tranquilly. So it's very common. You take you take something that could be described as an adjective, but you render it as a noun describing the person as someone who does that idea, right? So that's shalev. The next one is Shoftim 18:7. 1 second. Shoftim 18:7. Okay. Vayachu chameshet anashim vayavo laisha. That 5 men went out and went to Laish. Vayiru et ha'am asher b'kirba. They looked at all the people that were in their midst. Yoshevet ladetach, living safely and carefully. Kimishpat Sidonim, like the Sidonians. Shoket uvotech. They were, it's interesting, even the translation helps Rashi. The translation renders it as a tranquil and unsuspecting people, meaning not as the adjective tranquil and unsuspecting, but the word actually describing them as the type of people that they are. And the last one is Sar V'Za'ef. Let's look at that one. Well, that will close. What is that citation? It is
1 Kings 21:4.
1 Kings 20:43, is that?
21:4.
Mine says 43.
Mine says 43. Let's see who's right. Maybe it appears in two different places. Okay.
21:4.
Melech Yisrael al Beito, the king of Israel went back to his house. Sar V'Za'ef. In this translation, it's describing it as an adjective, right? That he was dispirited and sullen. But the way Rashi is reading it is these are descriptions of a type of person, a depressed person or a sullen person, as opposed to just a raw adjective. The proof texts are not perfect, but it's not even clear why Rashi is spending so much time saying this. But just so we understand it, before we go on to the next Rashi, which will be next time, the word ma'ain is describing Pharaoh in God's language as if you continue to be a refuser, which is slightly different than saying if in this moment you refuse. That would have been misarev. If you show yourself to be a refuser, all these things are going to come upon you. I know that was a little bit in the weeds of the grammar. Questions, comments before we close? Norm, last comment.
I think there's a big difference between one who refuses and one who is a refuser. Because, for example, somebody who smokes a cigarette once, that doesn't make him a smoker. But if he's smoking many cigarettes over a period of time, he's a smoker.
Yeah.
And in the same way, if Pharaoh refuses, that's just something that Pharaoh did.
Yeah.
But if he's a refuser, it's a pattern. We can expect him to constantly be refusing.
Yeah, interesting. So that may be what's going on here. And it all has to do with this topic that's going to be lingering for months with us, which is the relationship between habituation and character, and how much is in your control, and when and how hard it is to change who you are and what you do.
You have been listening to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. If you enjoy these podcasts, we invite you to write a review on the Apple Podcast site or wherever you get your podcasts. For more information about Temple Beth Am Los Angeles, go to tbala.org.